This morning, it's my privilege, because we were supposed to be in Ohio, and I didn't know what flights might be doing to get us home. Jeff Lawson, I invited Jeff to preach today on this first Sunday of the year. And Jeff, I think, eagerly accepted that invitation. It's kind of ironic in that his wife, Cindy, is not able to be here. Cindy, if you're watching in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now, hello. I hope your flight gets home tonight. So her flight got canceled twice yesterday. Jeff has pastored. He is a graduate of an institution called Taylor University. Go Trojans. That's three of us, I think. 1, 2, 3. All right. And he is now serving as chaplain for Cold Spring, which used to be Cold Spring Granite, and he travels the country ministering to the employees as a corporate chaplain, which I think is a great concept, to be able to have a chaplain hired by the company to be able to minister to the needs of the employees. Jeff, it is a privilege as you come to talk to us about what's next during this year. What is next? He's a Hoosier.
I am a Hoosier.
That's good. I'm a Hoosier by school. So.
Well, he was right. I definitely eagerly accepted the opportunity to come and bring God's word to you today. Cindy is in Michigan. Her mother still lives up that way, so she went to spend the week with her mom. And so she was supposed to come back yesterday, and that flight got canceled. And then first thing this morning was supposed to fly out, and that flight got canceled. So now we have her set coming at 6 o'clock, leaving there, getting here at 7. And the last check about 3 minutes ago, I've been refreshing my phone over and over and over. The flight is still on, so we're praying that it works out. But it was good for her to be able to go and to spend some time with her mother and her sister. And, it's one of those things, her being gone. I am a very poor bachelor. Very poor bachelor. So I know her stress level was pretty high on giving me instructions before she left because I am lost without her. So she takes me downstairs and shows me the washer and dryer and gives me instructions on this is how you work the washer and dryer. Cool. First load of laundry after she's gone. Open it up, put the clothes in, throw a couple Tide Pods in, close the door, go upstairs. Hour later, come downstairs. The laundry wasn't clean, but it was very dry. Could it be that I put my clothes into the dryer instead of the washer? Maybe so. Maybe so. But here's, on my part, though, you have to understand it's front loading, so it was a little bit confusing. So I decided I'm going to do some dishes because she taught me how to use the dishwasher. You put the dishes in, you put the liquid in, you close the door, you push the button, it goes. She didn't tell me there's 2 different kinds of dishwashing liquid, one for the dishwasher and one to wash by hand. So let's just say I depend upon her a lot more than maybe a lot of guys depend upon their wife. So I am really looking forward to having her home. One thing I did accomplish while she was away, I went up to Red Lake and spent a few days fishing. And I have to admit, I love to fish, but I'm not the world's best fisherman. But, I do a lot of reading, and I read up on it, and I do go up to Red Lake every year to go fishing. And typically it's fish after fish after fish. You catch a whole lot of walleye, and I was pretty excited about going up and spending a few days and sleeping on the ice and being up there. And no luck, not catching many fish. So I decided to change it up a little bit, maybe go outside and sit on the ice and try it out there, and still no luck. But there was a fellow that was just right down the way from me, and I'm kind of watching him, and he's catching fish after fish after fish. I'm thinking, what's going on here? So I scoot a little bit closer to him, and I see that he's using pink, like I'm using pink. And still, fish after fish. And he just, what's the deal? So I scoot a little bit closer. And I see that I'm using worms and he's using worms. fish after fish after fish. So finally I walk over, I'm like, listen, buddy, what's your secret? What's going on? Because my stress level is really, really high here. I'm not catching fish. And you got to keep the worms warm. Gross, huh? But here's the truth. When you go out fishing and you're not catching fish, it can cause stress, especially when all you took with you is SpaghettiOs, right? You can only eat SpaghettiOs so many times. Stress has been called America's #1 disease, and we all deal with stress. And the Bible has a lot to say about stress, and the Bible never promises that we're going to live this stress-free life. In fact, Jesus is very clear that sometimes life can be tiring. Life's going to wear you out, and it's going to bring stress from time to time. In fact, I would argue you don't want a stress-free life because the only people that don't have stress are those people in the cemetery, right? So a little stress, I guess, is okay. And Jesus says you're going to have some stress in life. Here's a news flash. It's not unchristian to be stressed out. Listen what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians. He says, when we arrived in Macedonia, there was no rest for us. We faced conflict from every direction, with battles on the outside and fear on the inside. Friends, have you ever been in that situation before? You dread going to the office because there's conflict in every direction. Or you dread coming home from work because there's conflict in every direction. Maybe you dreaded being with some family members over the Christmas holiday because there was conflict in every direction. Whatever it might be, we all feel that way at one time or another. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I was visiting a few weeks ago with Pastor Art, and he challenged me to think about this topic. Because the truth is, the last couple of years, they've just been gross. Grosser than a mouthful of worms, right? We've dealt with the effects of COVID in regards to our health and the health of our loved ones, job security, loss of income, overcrowded hospitals, social injustices, rioting, who to vote for, who not to vote for, who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. I mean, that's a lot. And I don't know about you, but I bet I've asked out loud 100 different times, God, what's next? What's next? Well, back to the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians. This is what he says. He says, I know I sound like a madman, but I've served him far more. I've worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped time without number, faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I faced danger from rivers and robbers. I faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as the Gentiles. I faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I've worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty and often gone without food. I've shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. I can just picture Paul looking at the sky saying, God, what's next? I've been through it all. What's next? And what I want to do over the next few minutes, just kind of give you some hope as you deal with the stresses that you might be feeling as you think about this going into the next year. 2020 was tough. 2021 was tough. Almost like a scene out of Groundhog Day, right? What's next? How can I deal with this? So I just want to kind of give you an idea and some help going forward. In fact, in your sermon outlines, you probably see an outline that we had included there for you. And I put it there to maybe help you follow along, so maybe to help you with this. And if you're like me, I like to dig a little bit deeper as we get into the week, so that might be something. And these are just kind of, again, it's not brain surgery here. It's just some broad strokes that are designed to help you as you kind of navigate these waters of what's next. So when I'm feeling stressed about what might be next, I do these 4 things. And to be a little bit more memorable, I spelled out the word next. So let's look at N, the first thing. When I'm feeling a wee bit stressed, I should note. Note God's faithfulness in my past. You know, when you start looking forward into your future and you feel stressed, the first step is to take note, to look back at your past. And you know, the Bible says over and over again, we're supposed to remember the past. In fact, the Old Testament has over 31 times where God says to his people, just remember. Remember. And if you recall, often in the Old Testament, whenever God did something great in the lives of the Israelites, he'd build an altar. And that altar, it would serve as a remembrance of God's faithfulness. So they would build this altar and they would move forward in time and they would be stressed out and something else. And God would say to them, I know you're stressed, but just remember. And they'd look back and they'd see that altar, and that altar was a visible reminder of God's faithfulness in the past. And that lowered their stress about the future. You see, I think it's important that we all need to build altars in our life. We should take note of what God has done in our past so that we can recall at what he's done, so that will lower our stress for the future. Because you see, God has been faithful to you in the past, and he's going to be faithful to you in the future. And I think it's good to have altars, and sometimes in modern life, altars are mementos. Things that represent things that you've accomplished, maybe little trophies or little celebrations. And maybe you keep something like that at home, or maybe you keep them in the office. I tend to keep things like this. In fact, I brought a couple with me today. The first one, my grandfather was a pastor, and this is his Bible. And I like to keep this. In fact, many times I've preached out of his Bible, although it's the old King James Version and it's not real readable. But sometimes I like to read it, and I kind of remember him and the legacy that he's left for me, and that was a blessing. The second thing is a hymn book. You ever see a hymn book before? You know, I do love the choruses, don't get me wrong, but something about those old hymns, the richness that comes with these old hymns, I just absolutely love it. And a lot of times during my morning devotions, I'll pull out the hymn book and I'll read for it. And one of my favorites is the old hymn, Count Your Blessings. You ever hear that song? When upon life's billows you're a tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Last verse. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be disheartened, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend, help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. I was going to sing that, but I didn't want to cause you stress. So whenever you're feeling fear about the future, the first thing is to count your blessings from the past. You know, note God's faithfulness in your past. Then you're ready for step 2 and next, which is the E. And E stands for evaluate. I need to evaluate the specific source of my stress. What exactly is it that's happening that's causing me to stress? I need to evaluate that. Now, I have people come in my office and they'll talk to me and they'll say, you know, Jeff, I'm just so stressed out. And I'll say, well, what are you stressed about? And they'll say, well, just everything, Jeff. I'm just stressed. And a lot of times I think it's true. We do. We feel that way. Sometimes we feel like we're stressed about everything, but when you start to dig a little bit deeper, it's not usually everything. It's usually one particularly difficult person at work, or one relationship that's not going the way that you wanted it to go. Just one thing that's really blowing up, and it's affecting everything else. Now, Pastor Art mentioned that I'm the chaplain at Cold Spring, and Cold Spring is a manufacturing company that deals with granite. And I tell you, I was tickled a few weeks back as Pastor Art did this series on well-being, because that's right up my alley when I'm doing at Cold Spring. I visit with folks who might be struggling with physical issues or financial issues or social issues or community issues or career issues or spiritual issues. Because the truth is any one of these issues, if they're out of balance, it can cause you stress. And once we evaluate what their issue might be, it can help to bring them to full health. And somehow or another, whenever you name it, it lowers your stress level, and now you can deal with that stress better. So one of the things I want to do is I want to help you to evaluate today is, what is it that's causing you stress? What are you stressed about? And then once you know what it is, understand that there is a good kind of stress and there's a bad kind of stress. And maybe that's surprising to you to know that there is a good stress, but good stress is the stuff that God allows. Now, notice I didn't say he causes, but God allows in your life to help grow you. Now, let me give you an example. I loved my work at Quiet Oaks, and many of you knew that I was a chaplain at Quiet Oaks. I loved being there. After pastoring for nearly 30 years and moving here to be closer to the grandkids, I went to work at Quiet Oaks, and I thought, I will be here for the rest of my life. It was great work. I love the facility. I love the mission. I love what they're doing. It was great work. And for a couple years, it was going very, very well. Enter 2020 and COVID. It affected them deeply. They could no longer afford a full-time chaplain. So I went from full-time to part-time. I'm not old enough to retire yet. So I started looking and praying, and God, what's next? I needed to find something. And, here's the thing. Through it all, we sense that God's walking alongside us. We truly believe with all our heart that he had a plan. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Many times I prayed and said, God, please make that plan known today. But unfortunately, we had to wait and we had to trust. And eventually, God opened the door for us at Cold Spring. But let me tell you, this is the best position I've ever had in my entire life. I love working for Cold Spring. So yeah, I had stress, but I would call that a good stress because we sensed that God was walking alongside us through this time of our stress and our uncertainty. In fact, Jesus kind of talked about this and the good stressors of life. And there's a passage in Mark 6:31 where Jesus says, let's get away from the crowds for a while and go rest. Now, why was that? Because Jesus had been doing so much ministry, right? And he says, there's so many people coming, that we didn't have enough time to eat. Now, it wasn't because he was doing anything wrong. It was a good kind of stress. And see, if you don't have good stress in your life will fall into distress. And that's what bad stress is. Bad stress is distress. Bad stress is when something happens in your life as a result of doing something that's not God's will. So whenever we choose to do something that's not God's will, there's consequences. And those consequences oftentimes cause distress. It's like when we start drinking too much, and that might lead to a breakup. It's when we start holding on to bitterness and we don't forgive, and that leads to maybe a relationship failure. It's when we engage in premarital sex, and that leads to a pregnancy scares. That's the stress in those different moments of your life. What you have to remember is that those moments, God hasn't left you. God can grow you through distress, just like he'll grow you through that good stress. You just have to give it to him and feel him walking alongside you through all of that. So I note God's faithfulness in the past, and E, I evaluate the specific source of stress. And number 3, fix to what I know is right. Now, I know fix doesn't start with an X, and I thought about making a xylophone and that we're going to teach Sue to play the xylophone, but I thought that might cause her stress. So I went with fix. Fix to what I know is right. Stress has a way of clouding our decision-making ability. And if you've been an adult for more than 10 minutes, you probably have this situation. You're under stress, and because of that stress, you make a bad decision, and then later you regret it. Anybody else like that? Is that just me? So what I'm saying is be very careful about making big decisions in your life when you're under stress. Don't make big relationship decisions when you're under stress. Don't make big career decisions when you're under stress. Pastor Art says probably don't invite a guest speaker when you're under stress. Hopefully you're not thinking that. One of my favorite authors, Travis Bradberry, writes in Emotional Intelligence. He says this, it's known that people under stress have a greater tendency to engage in unhealthy behaviors, such as excessive use or abuse of alcohol and drugs, cigarette smoking, and making poor nutritional choices than their less stressed counterparts. He says these unhealthy behaviors further increase the severity of symptoms related to stress, all leading to a vicious cycle of symptoms and unhealthy behaviors. I mean, this really resonates with me, So we have to be careful when there's stress in our life. And we have to fix ourselves to what we know is the tried and true. Fix ourselves to what we know is right. Because you see, here's what I've seen as a pastor. I've seen newly married couples under stress. And by the way, getting married is one of the biggest causes of stress. You get two people coming into a relationship together and all kinds of different habits coming in there. It causes stress, right? So this newly married couple is stressed and decide because we're so stressed, we're going to stop going to church because we need to spend Sundays together working on a relationship. And that causes greater arguments. Another person maybe gets a new project at work and they get promoted and they take on a new workload, and they used to get up early in the morning and spend time with God and in prayer with devotions, but now they get dressed and rush out the door because you need more hours in the day. Now, in these cases, the people pull away from the very thing that can help them in their stress. So what that does is it leads to a vicious cycle that the author was talking about. Because for the married couple who's dealing with the stress of a new marriage, the best thing they can do is go to church together. For the busy executive who had so much stuff to do, the best thing that they could do is start the day in prayer, because then they get God's power to help them through their new day, to help them through the stress. So it's so very tempting when we're under stress to pull away from the very things that matter most. So we have to make sure that we continue to do what's right, because it's only then that we get God's power in our life. This next verse from 1 Peter says, "The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do his right, and his ears are open to their prayers." Did you catch that? You do what's right, you get God's power. He says, "But the Lord turns his face against those who do evil." So if you start doing what's wrong and you fall into that vicious cycle, you not only hurt yourself, but you miss out on the power of God. So the answer is what do you need to focus on during the times of stress? I love what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4. He says to fix, there's that word again, fix your thoughts. Okay, here's what you focus on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise, especially when you're under stress, right? Keep putting into practice all that you've learned and received from me, everything you've heard from me and saw me doing. And here comes the promise. Then the God of peace will be with you. You see, God's promise is that when you keep doing what's right, you get his presence, and therefore you get his peace. So it really comes down to this issue of trust. Who are you going to trust during times of stress? And that leads to the last point, number 4, trust. Trust God completely with my future. Stress is really an issue of trust. Stress is kind of like a warning light. It's like a warning light on your car that's flashing. It's telling you that something's out of whack, okay? Something's going wrong. You got someplace kind of misplaced trust. I was reminded this a couple weeks ago. I was in California doing some work for Cold Spring, and word came out that this bad storm was going to be even worse than they expected, and lots of flights were going to be canceled coming into Bloomington, and I was very stressed. I had stuff to do. I didn't want to get stranded too long in California. People think, oh, you get stranded in California. Well, no, that's not always a good thing, right? So I was talking to Delta, and I was told, just take it easy. It's all going to be worked out. And let's just say taking it easy is not really in my vocabulary. I was pretty stressed, right? And I bet I called and talked to 10 different people trying to figure things out. Should I stay? Should I try it? Am I going to get stuck at my exchange in Salt Lake City? That wouldn't be any fun. What am I supposed to do? Finally, I was able to talk to our traveling secretary, and she says, here's what we're going to do, period. Done. Now, I didn't arrive home until 2:30 in the morning, but it was 12 hours ahead of the storm, and I didn't get stranded. And I was thinking about that this week is, what is the difference between these two situations, these two different issues? Well, the issue is, could I trust the person or not? I didn't know the person from Delta, whether I could trust them, but when it came to Margie, our traveling secretary, we have a history, and I knew I could trust her. So the same situation, different people, but the real issue was misplaced trust. Look, if you're feeling stressed out about your career, Maybe it's because you're trusting the wrong person with your career. If you're really stressed about your finances, maybe it's because you've got trust in the wrong places. If you're feeling stressed about relationships or marriage, maybe it's because you got trust in the wrong place. You want to put your trust in someone who's been there in the past, somebody that'll be there today, and someone who's completely faithful and worthy when it comes to your future. And there's only one place we can properly place that trust, and that's in God. God says this about our future, and we know this verse, "For I know the plans I have for you," says the Lord. "They're plans for good and not disaster, to give you a future and a hope." And then God goes on to say in Proverbs 3, one of my life verses, to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all that you do. He's going to show you which path to take. So friend, maybe you need to trust God in some area of your life. Maybe it's your work life. Maybe it's your financial life. Maybe it's an area we haven't even talked about today. Why not today just take that area and say, God, I don't get it. And yeah, I'm a little stressed, but I'm going to trust in you. I'm handing this over to you. And when you hand that stress over to God, in return, he promises to walk alongside you and let you feel his presence and give you his power like you've never sensed before. So as we start thinking about 2022 and what's next, we just have to remember that God is sovereign, which is one of those big 10-cent words. That means God's in control. He's in control of 2022. So I don't have to worry about what's next because he's already been there and he's working it out. Let me pray. God, I thank you for the promise of your presence. I think about that chorus we sing, if your presence doesn't go with us, we don't want to leave this place. We don't have to think about that because we know that it's not true, because you will go with us wherever we go. So help us, as we know that you're by us, help us to realize your presence, to cling on to that, and to forge forward in 2022, better people, because we serve a great God. We love you. We praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.